Dr. Elena Vasquez had been chasing the mystery person for 3 weeks when she finally met them face to face. Every time they struck, it was the same pattern. They would mess with computer systems that weren't too important, leave strange messages written in perfect English, and disappear without leaving any trace behind. This was impossible because the space station had cameras and sensors everywhere. Whoever was doing this had technology that made human security look like toys. The meeting happened at 3:47 in the morning in lab number 7. Elena's movement sensors had gone off during her late-night work. When she got there, she found someone in a fancy spacesuit standing near her alien life samples. They moved slowly and carefully as they looked at her research. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the person said without turning around. Their voice came through a machine that made it impossible to tell who they really were. "I know all about you." Elena kept her hand close to her emergency call button but didn't push it. Something about the way this person stood made her think they were curious, not dangerous. "You're the one who has been messing with our station," she said. "Messing with?" The person turned around. Their mask was more like art than protection. It had flowing lines that looked both alive and machine-like, with sensor parts that sparkled like jeweled eyes. "I like to think of it as checking quality." "Quality of what?" "Whether humans deserve the right to spread beyond their home planet." The electronic voice sounded disappointed. "So far, the results have been sad." Elena felt cold, and it wasn't because of the lab's air conditioning. "Who are you to judge if humans are worthy?" "Someone who has watched her kind for a long time. Someone who has studied your history, your culture, your technology, and how you behave." The person moved closer. Their spacesuit shifted in ways that suggested their body wasn't quite human. "Someone who has seen what you do to worlds that can't fight back." "And what do you think we do?" "You eat everything up. You change everything to make yourselves comfortable without thinking about what happens later. You break up ecosystems, use up resources, and leave damage behind." The person pointed at Elena's samples. "Even here, in what you call research, you take samples from where they belong just to satisfy your curiosity." Elena looked at her carefully kept sample containers. Each one had taken months of approval processes and gentle collection methods. These samples were gathered following strict rules to protect the environment. "We're trying to understand alien life so we can live alongside it better." "Live alongside." The person's laugh was changed by their machine but somehow showed real amusement. "Humans don't live alongside anything. Humans change their environment to suit themselves, then call the result civilization." "That's not true. We've learned from our mistakes." "Have you?" This research station was built right in the path where crystal whale creatures migrate. Your air processors mess up the chemical signals they use to navigate. Your power systems create interference that blocks their mating calls. The person walked to Elena's computer and brought up environmental data with scary ease. "But you keep working here because moving the station would be inconvenient." Elena stared at the data showing migration patterns she had never known about. "How do you know about the crystal whales?" "Our surveys didn't find any large life forms in this area." "Because your surveys looked for life that looks like yours. Carbon-based, living in temperatures and pressures that humans can handle, using chemistry like Earth life." The person's mask turned toward her, sensor parts glittering. "You want to find yourself reflected in the universe, then say anything different is empty or primitive." The criticism hurt because it had uncomfortable truth in it. Elena's own research focused on life forms that were similar to Earth biology, partly because they were easier to study and partly because the funding committees found them more interesting. If you know so much about proper alien biology research, why don't you share your methods instead of sabotaging ours? Because sharing requires trust, and trust requires proof of worthiness. The person moved away from the computer, looking at Elena's personal things scattered around the lab. Tell me, Dr. Vasquez, what would you do if you found a species with technology far better than yours? Elena thought about the question carefully. Try to learn from them. Set up ways to communicate. Find ways for both civilizations to benefit through cultural and scientific exchange. And if they wanted to protect their technological advantages, I'd respect their boundaries while showing that humans could be trusted with greater knowledge. The person was quiet for a long moment, their mask tilted like they were thinking. Showing trustworthiness. An interesting idea. How does one prove worthy of trust without being given the chance to succeed or fail? Elena felt like she was being tested, though she couldn't figure out what the test was about. By showing consistent ethical behavior in smaller matters. By proving that cooperation produces better results than exploitation. She paused. By sabotaging research stations to see how the people respond? The question hung in the air between them. Elena stared at the masked person, understanding starting to grow. You're not trying to destroy our work. You're testing us. Perhaps. Or perhaps I am simply an alien terrorist with sophisticated technology and too much time. The person moved toward the lab's exit. The universe is huge, Dr. Vasquez, full of wonders and horrors that your species cannot yet imagine. The question is whether humanity will be ready when it meets them. Ready for what? For the knowledge that you are not alone, that you are not the smartest species in the galaxy, that your expansion into space has been watched, judged, and... The person stopped at the doorway. And that some of us have been hoping you would prove worthy of contact. Elena felt her heart beat faster. Contact with whom? With those who have been protecting you from threats you do not yet understand. With civilizations that have watched your development with interest. With beings who remember when they were as young and promising as humanity appears to be. The person stepped through the doorway, but their voice carried clearly back to Elena. Continue your research, Dr. Vasquez. But perhaps consider expanding your definition of life worth studying. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than your current methods can detect. Elena rushed to follow, but the hallway was empty. Security sensors showed no movement. Environmental monitors detected no air disturbances, and the station's computer reported no unauthorized people in any section. She returned to her lab to find something that hadn't been there before. A small crystal object sitting beside her computer, glowing with soft living light that pulsed in complex patterns. When she tested it with her analysis equipment, the results showed a structure that went against everything she understood about possible biochemistry. As she studied the impossible gift, Elena found herself wondering who would go to such elaborate lengths to test humanity's worthiness, and more importantly, what they were hoping to find. Elena's meetings with the masked being became a strange routine over the following weeks. They would appear in different places throughout the station, sometimes in her lab, occasionally in the observation lounge, once memorably in the kitchen while she was making coffee at 3 a.m. Each meeting brought increasingly complex philosophical debates that Elena found herself looking forward to despite their challenging nature. Your species' literature is remarkably dark for a civilization that claims to value hope, the being observed during their fifth meeting, pointing to the tablet Elena had been reading. End-of-the-world futures, disaster scenarios, endless variations on the theme of humanity's destruction. Elena looked down at her copy of The Left Hand of Darkness and smiled. You think Ursula Le Guin was dark? She imagined a future where humanity survived long enough to join a galactic civilization. She filled it with political intrigue, cultural conflicts, and individual suffering, but also with hope. Even your optimistic visions assume that progress requires struggle. Maybe because the best stories come from characters overcoming challenges. Paradise might be pleasant to live in, but it makes for boring reading. Elena set down her tablet. Besides, how do you know so much about human literature if you hate our culture? The being's mask turned away slightly. Knowledge of one's subjects is essential for proper evaluation. Subjects. That's an interesting word choice. Specimens, then. Research targets. The terminology doesn't matter. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying the being's body language. Despite their hostile words, they had positioned themselves within talking distance and faced toward her. Postures that suggested engagement rather than superiority. What about music? Have you evaluated our musical traditions as part of your research? Human musical structures are simple but occasionally display unexpected mathematical elegance. The being's response was quick, as if they'd given the topic considerable thought. Bach achieved patterns that suggest intuitive understanding of multi-dimensional harmonic relationships. High praise from someone who thinks we're unworthy of the stars. Even inferior species occasionally stumble across transcendent concepts. Elena pulled out her personal music player and activated a piece she'd been listening to. Debussy's Clair de Lune. The soft piano melody filled the observation lounge, and she watched the being's reaction carefully. For a moment, their rigid posture relaxed slightly. The mask tilted in a way that suggested listening rather than analyzing. When the piece ended, they were quiet for several seconds. Debussy understood something about the relationship between sound and emotion that most of your composers miss, the being said finally. He painted with audio frequencies the way your visual artists use light and color. You sound like you actually enjoy human music. I appreciate technical competence wherever it shows up. The being's voice carried a defensive edge. Even broken clocks are correct twice daily. Elena laughed. Did you just quote a human saying while trying to insult humanity? The concept translates across multiple linguistic frameworks. It requires no specific cultural knowledge. Elena activated another piece. Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. What about jazz? This time the being's reaction was even stronger. They moved closer to the music source, their mask angled as if studying the sound from multiple directions. Improvisation within structure, they murmured, seemingly forgetting to maintain their hostile tone. Organized chaos that somehow achieves coherence. How do your musicians coordinate such complex interactions without predetermined frameworks? Practice, intuition, and trust in their fellow performers. Elena watched the being's body language soften as they listened. Jazz requires musicians to be vulnerable with each other, to take risks, knowing their partners will support them. Vulnerability as a creative tool. The being's voice carried something that might have been wonder. Most species view uncertainty as weakness to be eliminated. Most humans do, too. Jazz musicians are special because they've learned to make uncertainty beautiful. When the music ended, the being stepped back, their posture returning to its previous stiffness. Interesting technical exercise, though I fail to see how musical competence compensates for your species' general destructiveness. Elena decided to push further. What about visual art? Have you studied human painting, sculpture, digital media? Visual representation serves no productive purpose. It is waste of resources for purely aesthetic goals. Despite their dismissive words, Elena noticed the being's mask turn toward the small reproduction of Van Gogh's Starry Night she kept mounted near her workspace. The sensor arrays seemed to focus on it with unusual intensity. Van Gogh painted that while struggling with mental illness, Elena said softly. He saw something in the night sky that the rest of us missed. Movement, energy, the living quality of light itself. He captured a vision of beauty so powerful that humans still travel across galaxies to see his original paintings. Mental illness producing accidental beauty proves nothing about human worthiness. Doesn't it? A species that can find meaning in suffering, that can transform pain into something that brings joy to others. Doesn't that suggest we might be more than just destructive consumers? The being was quiet for a long moment. One individual's artistic achievement does not excuse an entire species of its fundamental flaws. No, but it might suggest that those flaws aren't fundamental. That they're problems we can grow beyond. Elena stood and moved to the observation window, looking out at the stars. You keep talking about humanity like we're finished products being evaluated for quality control, but we're not products. We're a process. We're still becoming whatever we're going to be. And if that process leads to galactic catastrophe, then it leads to galactic catastrophe. But if it leads to something beautiful, something like jazz or Van Gogh, or the courage to reach for distant stars despite not knowing what we'll find there, wouldn't that be worth the risk? The being joined her at the observation window, their environmental suit reflecting the starlight in patterns that suggested advanced optical technology. Risk tolerance varies significantly among spacefaring civilizations. Some consider potential negative outcomes unacceptable regardless of possible benefits. And others? Others believe that growth requires the freedom to fail. The being's mask turned toward Elena. The question is which philosophy produces better long-term results. Elena studied the being's reflection in the observation window, noting how their posture mirrored her own. What do you think? I think, the being said slowly, that this conversation is more interesting than my original evaluation parameters anticipated. Original parameters? Nothing. I misspoke. The being stepped away from the window. I should return to my research. Wait. Elena turned to face them directly. Why do you keep coming back? If humans are so disappointing, why continue these conversations? The being paused at the lounge exit. Perhaps even failed experiments provide useful data. But their voice carried something Elena hadn't heard before. Uncertainty that suggested the being might be questioning their own conclusions about humanity's worth. After they left, Elena found another gift waiting in her laboratory. A small piece of what appeared to be crystallized music, its structure somehow encoding harmonic relationships in physical form. When she played audio frequencies near it, the crystal resonated with overtones that created impossibly beautiful chord progressions. Someone who claimed to hate human creativity had just given her art that went beyond anything in her experience. The contradiction was becoming impossible to ignore. The solar storm hit Kepler Research Station with devastating precision, as if the universe had decided to test everything Elena and the masked being had been debating about human resilience under pressure. Warning systems screamed throughout the facility as electromagnetic pulses knocked out primary power. Backup generators failed in cascade, and life support systems began their ominous countdown to complete failure. Elena was in the main engineering section coordinating emergency repairs when the being appeared beside her, not with their usual careful entrance, but materializing out of what seemed like empty air with technology that defied human understanding. "Your electromagnetic shielding is pathetically inadequate," they announced without preamble, their electronic voice cutting through the chaos of alarms and shouted commands. "Solar radiation is penetrating your hull at levels that will prove lethal within 4 hours." "We're aware of the situation," Elena replied, not bothering to question how they bypassed every security system on the station. "Chief Engineer Martinez is implementing emergency protocols." Engineer Martinez is following procedures designed for minor electromagnetic disturbances. "This storm exceeds your worst-case planning scenarios by several orders of magnitude." The being moved to the main engineering console, their hands dancing across controls with impossible familiarity. "These modifications will provide temporary stabilization, but the fundamental problem requires solutions beyond your current technological capabilities." Elena watched in amazement as systems that had been failing systematically began stabilizing under the being's administrations. "How do you know our engineering systems so well?" "I have been observing your operations for considerably longer than you realize." The being's attention remained focused on the console. "Your people design robust systems, but they lack experience with truly extreme conditions. So you're helping us now." "I am preventing the unnecessary destruction of valuable research data." The being's voice carried its familiar defensive edge. "Your alien biology specimens represent years of collection efforts that would be wasteful to lose due to inadequate engineering." Elena noticed that the being's rescue efforts were prioritizing life support over data storage. Whatever their claimed motivations, they were focused on keeping people alive. "Those specimens you're worried about, most of them are still in their natural habitats. We could collect new samples." The being's hands paused over the controls. "Of course. I was referring to analytical convenience. Replacement would require significant time investment." Chief Engineer Martinez approached, his expression bewildered. "Dr. Vasquez, these system modifications are beyond anything in our technical manuals. Whoever programmed them understands our equipment better than we do." Elena looked at the being, whose mask remained focused on the engineering displays. They seemed to have extensive knowledge of human technology. Extensive knowledge. Martinez studied the modifications more closely. "This is technology that anticipates problems we didn't know we had. Look at this. They've rerouted power through backup systems that aren't even listed in our schematics." "Perhaps your documentation is incomplete," the being suggested. "No, these are systems that were added after construction. Hidden redundancies built into the station's infrastructure." Martinez's voice carried growing amazement. "Someone has been upgrading our capabilities without our knowledge." Elena felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. How long would it take to install modifications like these? "Years," Martinez replied immediately. And it would require intimate knowledge of every system on the station, plus access to manufacturing capabilities that exceed our current technology level. The being had gone very still at the engineering console. Elena moved closer, studying their posture. You haven't been sabotaging our station. You've been protecting it. I have been monitoring your operations for potential safety hazards. Monitoring by secretly upgrading our life support systems, adding redundant safety measures, and ensuring our equipment could handle emergencies we didn't know were possible. Basic prudence requires maintaining adequate safety margins. Elena looked around the engineering section, noting details she'd never paid attention to before. Subtle modifications to environmental controls, additional sensor arrays that hadn't been in the original construction plans, backup systems that seemed almost too convenient in their placement. How long have you been here? She asked quietly. I arrive and depart as my research requires. That's not what I asked. The being's mask turned toward her, sensor arrays glittering. Dr. Vasquez, this is neither the time nor place for philosophical discussions. Your people require immediate assistance to survive the current crisis. But Elena wasn't ready to let the subject drop. You've been here since the beginning, haven't you? Watching us, protecting us, testing us, all while pretending to despise everything we represent. I do not pretend anything. Human limitations are objectively demonstrable. Then why have you spent months ensuring our survival? The being was quiet for a long moment, their attention seemingly focused on the engineering displays. When they finally spoke, their voice carried a quality Elena had never heard before, something that might have been vulnerability. Because, they said slowly, observing failure is less instructive than observing adaptation under pressure. And because terminating the experiment prematurely would compromise the validity of long-term behavioral analysis. Elena smiled despite the crisis surrounding them. You care about us. I care about proper scientific methodology. You've been risking exposure to protect the species you claim to find worthless. I have been maintaining appropriate safety protocols for ongoing research subjects. Martinez looked between them with growing confusion. Are you two arguing about research methodology while the station's life support is failing? The station's life support is no longer failing, the being replied, gesturing to displays showing stabilized systems. Emergency modifications have provided sufficient protection from solar radiation effects. Elena studied the readouts, noting that every system was not only stabilized, but operating at efficiency levels that exceeded original specifications. These aren't temporary modifications, are they? You've been gradually upgrading our entire infrastructure. Temporary modifications would be insufficient for long-term observation requirements. Long-term observation of what? Of whether humanity demonstrates the capacity for growth that justifies continued development. The admission hung in the air between them. Elena felt her understanding of their entire relationship shifting as she realized the being's criticism had never been about proving human unworthiness. It had been about proving the opposite. You've been hoping we'd succeed, she said softly. I have been evaluating probability matrices for various developmental outcomes. You've been cheering for us. I have been maintaining objective analytical perspective. Elena looked at this being who had spent months insulting humanity while secretly ensuring their survival and success. What happens when your evaluation is complete? The being's mask turned away, their attention returning to the engineering console. That depends on the results of the evaluation. And if we pass? Passing implies the existence of predetermined criteria. I am simply observing and documenting behavioral patterns. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I am authorized to provide. Elena caught the significance of the word choice. Authorized by whom? But the being was already moving toward the exit, their emergency assistance complete. Dr. Vasquez, your people have demonstrated remarkable adaptability under pressure. Continue developing that trait. The universe contains challenges that will test human resilience far more thoroughly than any solar storm. Wait, Elena called after them. Don't disappear again. Stay and help us understand what we're really preparing for. The being paused at the threshold. Understanding comes through experience, not explanation. But perhaps they seem to struggle with internal conflict. Perhaps some guidance would not compromise the evaluation parameters. What kind of guidance? The kind that helps promising students avoid preventable mistakes. The being's mask turned back toward her. Dr. Vasquez, humanity stands at a crucial developmental threshold. The choices your species makes in the coming years will determine whether you join the galactic community or remain isolated on your home world. And you're here to help us choose correctly? I am here to observe whether you can choose correctly without assistance. The being's voice carried something that might have been hope. Though I admit my objectivity has become compromised by extended observation. Elena smiled. Compromised how? By the discovery that hope is more interesting than despair, and that potential is more compelling than limitation. As the being disappeared once again into whatever advanced camouflage system they employed, Elena found herself looking at the station around her with new eyes. Every system, every safety feature, every bit of technology that had seemed almost too good to be true. All of it evidence of someone who had been protecting them while claiming to evaluate their worthiness. The question was whether they were ready for whatever test was coming next. Elena's investigation into the station's mysterious upgrades revealed the scope of her masked visitor's deception. Hidden throughout the facility were technological improvements that spanned years of development, power systems that could handle loads far beyond their rated capacity, environmental controls that maintained perfect atmospheric balance despite impossible external conditions, and communication arrays that seemed to reach farther into space than human technology should allow. Dr. Vasquez, Chief Engineer Martinez said as they reviewed the modified systems, "Whoever installed these upgrades has been protecting us from threats we didn't even know existed. Look at this gravitational stabilization array. It's been compensating for microasteroid impacts that our sensors never detected." Elena studied the readouts showing dozens of tiny course corrections that had prevented catastrophic collisions. How long has this been active? Based on the modification timestamps, since approximately 6 months after the station became operational. Someone has been our invisible guardian for over 2 years. The revelation that followed was even more staggering. Deep in the station's communication logs, Elena found evidence of external threats that had been quietly deflected, probe signals from hostile alien species, radiation bursts that should have been lethal, and several instances where unknown vessels had approached the station only to retreat without making contact. "We've never been alone out here," she murmured, studying patterns that showed a complex web of galactic politics surrounding Earth's expanding presence in space. Her next encounter with the being took place in her quarters, where she had surrounded herself with printouts and data displays documenting their secret protection. "You know, the being said without preamble as they materialized in her sitting area. Most species find obsessive research behavior concerning rather than admirable. Elena looked up from her analysis. Most species don't discover that their greatest critic has been their greatest protector for years. The being's posture stiffened. Protection implies emotional investment. I have simply been preventing external interference with ongoing observation protocols. External interference like what? Elena gestured to the data surrounding her. Hostile alien probes, radiation bursts, ships that approached us with what our analysis suggests were predatory intentions. The galaxy contains many species with varying approaches to first contact procedures. And you've been running interference to make sure we only encounter the friendly ones. I have been ensuring that initial contact occurs under optimal conditions for accurate behavioral assessment. Elena stood and moved closer to the being, noting how their environmental suits seemed to shift and flow in ways that suggested it was more integrated with their biology than she had previously realized. How many species know about humanity? Knowledge varies in scope and accuracy across multiple civilizations. That's not an answer. The being was quiet for a moment, their mask angled away from Elena in what she was learning to recognize as a sign of internal conflict. 47 species have detected evidence of human technological development. 23 have identified Earth as the source. 11 have developed specific policies regarding human expansion. 4 have made preliminary contact assessments. Elena felt the universe suddenly become much larger and more crowded. And you represent which group? I represent interests that predate current galactic political structures. Interests in what? In the development of species that demonstrate potential for transcending their evolutionary limitations. Elena studied the being's body language, noting the careful precision of their word choices. You're not just observing humanity for your own species. You're here on behalf of some kind of galactic organization. I am here because certain perspectives value the cultivation of wisdom over the accumulation of power. And humanity has potential for wisdom? Humanity has potential for many things. Wisdom is one possibility among several, though not the most probable based on historical precedent. Elena smiled. But you're hoping for wisdom anyway. The being's mask turned toward her, sensor arrays focusing with unusual intensity. Dr. Vasquez, hope is an inefficient emotional response that compromises objective evaluation. I do not hope. I calculate probabilities and prepare for multiple contingencies. Yet you've spent 2 years secretly protecting us while publicly criticizing our unworthiness. That sounds like hope to me. That sounds like maintaining controlled experimental conditions. By risking exposure to prevent us from encountering hostile aliens before we're ready. By ensuring that contact occurs according to established protocols for species development. Elena moved to her desk and pulled out the crystal gifts the being had left during their previous encounters. And these? Are they part of your evaluation protocols too? The being went very still. Those are samples of advanced materials science for your analysis. They're art. Elena held up the crystallized music, watching it catch and refract the room's lighting. You've been sharing your culture with me while claiming that human culture is worthless. Cultural exchange is a recognized method for assessing aesthetic development. Cultural exchange implies mutual respect between equals. Elena set the crystal down carefully. You don't treat me like a research subject. You treat me like a friend. The words seemed to hit the being like a physical blow. They stepped back, their environmental suits patterns shifting in ways that suggested agitation. Friendship is inappropriate between evaluator and subject. Personal attachment compromises professional objectivity. Then why do you keep coming back? Why engage in philosophical debates about human potential? Why share music and art and ideas that go far beyond any evaluation protocol? Because the being's voice trailed off, their mask angling away from Elena. Because what? Because isolation is difficult when surrounded by beings who demonstrate curiosity and creativity despite their limitations. Elena felt something shift in the space between them. You're lonely. I am professionally isolated by the requirements of my assignment. How long have you been alone? The being was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if they would answer at all. When they finally spoke, their voice carried a weight that suggested years of solitude. My people do not engage in direct contact during evaluation periods. I have been observing human development without meaningful social interaction for an extended period. How extended? 7 years of your time. Elena stared at them. 7 years. You've been watching us for 7 years. Initial assessment required comprehensive baseline data collection. Long-term observation protocols demanded continuous monitoring through multiple development phases. 7 years of hiding, watching, protecting us while pretending to despise everything we represent. Elena moved closer. That's not professional evaluation. That's personal investment. Personal investment would be a violation of evaluation protocols. Then you're in violation. The being's environmental suit patterns shifted more rapidly, and Elena caught glimpses of something beneath the flowing material. Brief flashes that suggested anatomy more graceful than human but recognizably similar. Dr. Vasquez, this conversation is approaching inappropriate territory. Inappropriate how? Because I'm acknowledging that you care about us? Because I'm recognizing that your criticism comes from frustration rather than contempt? Because I'm pointing out that you've spent 7 years protecting beings you claim to find worthless? Because acknowledging such sentiments would require me to admit that my objectivity has been compromised beyond acceptable parameters. Elena felt her heart racing as she realized how close they were to genuine honesty. What would happen if you admitted that? My evaluation would be considered invalid. My recommendations regarding human development would be dismissed as emotionally biased, and I would be recalled from this assignment. And that matters because? Because the being's voice grew quiet, vulnerable in a way Elena had never heard before, because leaving would mean abandoning beings who have become significant to my understanding of what civilization can achieve. Significant how? Significant enough that their success has become more important to me than my own professional advancement. Elena felt tears in her eyes. You love us. Love is an imprecise term that applies poorly to interspecies relationships. Then what would you call it? The being stood perfectly still for a long moment, their mask angled toward the crystal art pieces Elena had displayed. I would call it recognition. Recognition that intelligence can manifest in forms that transcend evolutionary origin. That creativity and compassion are more valuable than technological superiority. That beings who create music from organized chaos and find beauty in suffering might possess wisdom that older civilizations have forgotten. And that recognition makes you want to protect us. That recognition makes me want to see what you become when given the opportunity to grow without external interference. Elena reached out tentatively, her hands stopping just short of the being's environmental suit. What if we could grow with guidance instead of just protection? What if contact could happen gradually, carefully, with someone who understands both human potential and galactic realities? Such contact would violate every protocol for species development. But would it be better for humanity? The being's mask turned toward her hand, still hovering near their suit. Possibly. Probably. But it would end my ability to serve as official evaluator. And would that be worth it to help us become what we could be instead of just documenting what we are? Dr. Vasquez, you are asking me to choose between duty and... They paused, struggling with concepts that their training had apparently never prepared them for. And personal conviction about what serves the greater good. I'm asking you to choose between following rules and following your heart. The being's environmental suit went completely still, even its constant subtle movement ceasing. Hearts are unreliable guides for civilizational decisions. Maybe, but they're the only guides we have for decisions about what kind of beings we want to be. Elena could see the being struggling with internal conflict that went far beyond professional protocol. When they finally spoke, their voice carried a quality she'd never heard before. Fear mixed with hope and something that might have been love. Elena, they said, using her given name for the first time, if I choose to trust your species with knowledge that could transform your civilization, will you help me trust that transformation can be guided by wisdom rather than exploited for power? Yes, Elena said without hesitation. Though I should point out that asking requires more trust than you've been willing to show so far. Trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires... The being's hands moved toward their mask. Requires the courage to be seen rather than merely observed. Elena held her breath as she realized what was about to happen. Are you ready to be seen? I am ready, the being said softly, to discover whether the beings I have come to care for can accept someone who has been watching them with love disguised as judgment. As their hands reached the latches of their mask, Elena understood that everything was about to change, not just between them, but for humanity's entire future among the stars. The moment was interrupted by alarms that Elena had hoped never to hear, the deep resonant tones that indicated incoming vessels of unknown origin and potentially hostile intent. The being's hands froze on their mask as emergency lighting bathed Elena's quarters in red shadows. External contact alert, announced the station's AI. 3 vessels approaching on intercept vectors. Technology signatures unknown. All personnel to emergency stations. The being's mask turned toward Elena, sensor arrays blazing with sudden intensity. Krillian scout ships. They must have detected the solar storm damage and assumed the station was vulnerable. Krillians? Aggressive species that views human expansion as territorial encroachment. They have been advocating for preemptive action against Earth's colonial efforts. The being moved toward Elena's window, their environmental suits patterns shifting to deeper, more urgent configurations. This is exactly the kind of contact I have been working to prevent. Elena followed, watching 3 sleek vessels approach the station with unmistakable predatory intent. Can we defend ourselves? Not against Krillian technology. Your defensive systems are decades behind their offensive capabilities. The being's voice carried frustration and what might have been fear. They are here to eliminate what they perceive as a human forward base. And you can't stop them without revealing yourself. Revealing myself would expose not only my presence, but the fact that humanity has been under advanced protection. The Krillians would interpret that as evidence of military alliance with superior species. The being's hands clenched into fists. They would escalate from elimination of this station to preemptive attack on Earth itself. Elena felt the weight of impossible choices settling over them. So our options are, let them destroy the station or trigger a war. Those appear to be the available alternatives. Elena watched the approaching ships, her mind racing through possibilities. What if there was a third option? What if contact could happen on our terms instead of theirs? I do not understand. You said the Krillians view human expansion as territorial encroachment. What if they discovered that humans aren't expanding alone? That we have advisors helping us navigate galactic politics appropriately? The being went very still. You are suggesting that I reveal myself to prevent hostile first contact. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for humanity to meet the galaxy as your partner instead of your test subject. The station shook as the Krillian ships powered weapons that Elena's instruments couldn't even properly analyze. Through the intercom, she could hear Chief Martinez coordinating a defense that they both knew was hopeless. Elena, the being said quietly, if I do this, everything changes. Not just for us, but for your entire species. Contact with galactic civilization will speed up human development in ways that cannot be predicted or controlled. And if you don't, then I watch beings I have come to love die to preserve protocols that may no longer serve any useful purpose. Elena turned away from the window to face the being directly. Then make your choice. Not as an evaluator, not as a representative of galactic interests, but as someone who cares about us. What do you think is best for humanity? The being's mask turned toward her, and Elena could see her own reflection in the sensor arrays. I think, they said slowly, that humanity deserves the chance to make their own choices about their galactic future. Even if they make the wrong choices. Especially if they make the wrong choices. Growth requires the freedom to fail. The station shook again, more violently this time. Warning systems indicated that the Krillian ships were charging weapons for what would probably be a decisive strike. Elena, the being said, reaching for their mask. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that observing your species has been the greatest privilege of my existence. Past tense? Present continuous. Observing your species is the greatest privilege of my existence. The mask came away in their hands, and Elena saw the being's true face for the first time. They were beautiful in ways that human language couldn't adequately describe. Features that were recognizably similar to human bone structure, but refined to mathematical precision. Skin that held depths of color like captured starlight. And eyes that seemed to contain entire galaxies. But more than their physical appearance, Elena was struck by the expression they wore. Vulnerability mixed with determination, fear combined with hope, and an openness that spoke of someone finally allowing themselves to be completely seen. My name is Zara, they said, and their voice without the electronic modifier was music, harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions Elena couldn't name. I am what humans might become, given several million years of guided evolution. Elena stared at this being who represented humanity's potential future. You're us. You're what we could become. I am what my people became when they learned to value wisdom over power, cooperation over domination, and growth over stagnation. Zara moved to Elena's communication console. And now I'm going to introduce humanity to galactic civilization by preventing a war. What are you going to tell them? The truth. That humanity is under the protection of the first civilization. That any aggressive action against human space will be considered an act of war against beings whose technology makes their own look primitive. Zara's fingers danced over controls with impossible grace. And that if they want to engage in productive contact with humans, they can do so through proper diplomatic channels. The communication link activated, and Elena watched Zara transform from vulnerable individual to cosmic authority figure. When they spoke, their voice carried harmonics that suggested power beyond measurement. Krillian vessels, Zara said, you are interfering with a protected species under First Civilization guidance. Withdraw immediately or face consequences that extend far beyond this single encounter. The response came after several seconds of what Elena imagined was frantic consultation among the Krillian commanders. First Civilization contact was undetected by our sensors. Provide identification protocols. Zara activated systems that Elena hadn't known existed. Suddenly, the space around the station filled with displays of technology that made human engineering look like stone tools. Ships that existed partially outside normal space, energy patterns that bent reality around impossible geometries, and defensive systems that turned the research station into something that could probably defend itself against entire fleets. Identification provided, Zara said calmly. Withdraw or be removed. The Krillian ships retreated so quickly that Elena barely had time to register their departure. Within minutes, they had vanished into whatever faster-than-light drive system they employed, leaving the station surrounded by displays of advanced technology that slowly faded back into invisibility. Well, Elena said after a moment of stunned silence, that was dramatic. Zara turned away from the communication console, their expression uncertain. Elena, I have just initiated first contact between humanity and galactic civilization while simultaneously declaring myself your species' official protector. The ramifications will be extensive. Elena looked at this being who had sacrificed their professional objectivity and risked their standing with their own people to protect humans they had come to love. Any regrets? Many, but not about the choice itself. Zara moved closer, their starlight eyes studying Elena's face. Though I should mention that I am now officially a diplomatic refugee with no way to return to my previous position. And that bothers you? It terrifies me, but it also. Zara smiled, and the expression transformed their features with warmth that made Elena's heart race. It also feels like the first honest thing I have done in 7 years. Elena reached out and took Zara's hand, marveling at skin that felt like warm silk with depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. So what happens now? Now, humanity learns that they are not alone in the universe, that their expansion into space has been observed and protected, and that their future includes opportunities they cannot yet imagine. Zara's fingers intertwined with Elena's. And I learn what it means to choose personal truth over professional duty. Any guesses about how either of those will turn out? None whatsoever. But I have learned that uncertainty can be beautiful when shared with beings who value growth over safety. Elena laughed, thinking about jazz musicians taking risks in the trust that their partners would support them. I think you're going to like being human. I think, Zara said, their voice carrying harmonics of joy and possibility, I have been learning to be human for longer than I realized. Through the observation window, Elena could see distant stars that no longer seemed cold and empty, but instead sparkled with the promise of civilizations, relationships, and possibilities that humanity was finally ready to explore. And beside her stood someone who had chosen to reveal themselves not as judge or protector, but as partner in whatever incredible future they would build together. Some masks, Elena realized, were meant to be removed not to reveal what lay beneath, but to discover what could be built when artifice gave way to truth.